Hey, and welcome back to the studio, here for the first episode of my next commission build. In this commission, luckily I'm going to have the opportunity to show you guys kind of a step-by-step as I do it. In the last one, I wasn't really able to show a step-by-step, but, luckily I was able to get just a bit of a showcase video out for that. But anyhow, so this, we're really going to get in-depth and in detail into this next project, which I've dubbed, we're not 100% sure on the name yet, but it's the Pixie Ring Song. So I've done it in the past. I've taken a mushroom soup can and turned it into a mushroom. I thought that had turned out pretty well, but it was lacking a bit of cohesion with the other things around it. I mean, it worked well as a singular piece, but if you're going to have something like that in your home, it has to tell more of a story than just a pixie or a fairy or a fae sitting on a mushroom. What I've decided is trying to tell the story of how a pixie ring is formed, and basically that is going to be told through, these pixie type creatures, which I haven't. This is not what it's going to look like. Trust me on that. But these pixie-like creatures are going to have a bunch of different types of instruments, and, these are different mushroom cap types potentially for this. And they're going to be growing these mushrooms with their song. So, I mean, that's the story behind it. But, with that story in mind, that's going to give me a point for reference and detail that I can work off of. So, with all of that established, we can start talking a little bit about the materials that I plan on using for this. And again, in keeping with the theme that I've been doing, is I use a ton of reclaimed material. And the material for this is a literal soup can, a corn can, and a maple syrup can. Quite Canadian. But it's quite amazing the transformation that you can do to something along these lines. There's a bit of a cleaning process involved in this. There's a food-safe lining on the inside of these cans that is more akin to plastic than it is to metal. So the process that I did is I actually just used a torch and burnt it out of there outside because it smells really bad. So after I did that, I threw it in a vinegar bath and got the rest of it all cleaned up. And this is ultimately the type of metal slug that I'm going to be working with to create a metal mushroom. And I also did save the end, and the end is going to play a very big, important role in creating the gills underneath. So all of this, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now, but once I get this stuff laid out and start some shaping, it'll really start making a lot more sense. So I'll get myself set up here, and also for the construction of these guys, since my last commission, I did a wire wrap commission, and so I have quite a bit of extra wire laying around, and I really do like this medium. I believe that you can achieve quite a bit with very little material. So we'll see what I can do in regards to that to create a really unique fae or fairy, along with some instruments, and we're going to see where we can go with this. So I'm going to get set up here, and I'll see you in a second. Before we get too far into the reeds in this and I start hammering away, I want to explain a few things about this material that I'm working with and some of the challenges that I'm presented with. So with the mild steel that is thin, one of the things we have to worry about is this material rolling over or kinking. And I've done a bit of a demonstration piece here. That can be beneficial sometimes if that's the texture you're looking for, but the first mushroom that we're going to be forming is going to have a very smooth cap with gills underneath, and having this wrinkle along the edge of a dome is not, it doesn't look that great. So we're going to be meticulously taking out all of these little rings that are impressed into this steel. And in the process of doing that, that's going to dish this material out. And once it's dished out, then I can kind of fine-tune it into the shape that I want. And one of the benefits of using this size is that by the time I'm done, this bottom portion should fit very tightly and provide a nice solder joint. So with all that being explained, it's hammer time, and I'll get to doing a bit of shaping, and I'll show you guys some shots in between. So with that little initial bit of forming done, I've domed the top of this thing out. And that's domed out okay. I mean, there's no finishing work done on this yet. But we have a really bad rolled edge here, right from the factory. It's almost a kink. So if I were to put that here on this wood and try to hammer it out, it's going to really potentially kink that, and then this piece is scrapped, basically. It would be very difficult to get that kink out. So what I've done is I've just taken and cut the handle off of my vise. No, this is an old vise handle that I had saved from a scrap bin. And so this is a nice solid chunk of steel, and it's going to allow me the opportunity to get really close inside of this radius and provide a nice dolly edge, or a really nice solid steel edge that I can do a steel on steel action and take that ridge out of there and smooth all of that out so I can get a nice dome. I'm not going to do it in this vise because I've tried it just before this shot and it does not work. So I'm going to put it in the big vise and do a bit of work around that, and then I'll be back in a second. You're doing something like this, if you notice that you do start to develop some pretty bad kinks, regardless of where you are on your piece and forming, you should really stop and then kind of work out the worst of them and then mark where you had left off and then just continue on. Alright, so after that bit of hammering and shaping on this, we were able to achieve quite a nice dome shape. It had been a little bit too long, so I just marked it and cut off the excess. And at this point, we are looking to create the bottom portion, which is going to represent the gills and where the stem is going to connect into the base here. So at this point, we kind of want to decide on the amount of definition or resolution we're going to have in our sculpture. So there aren't too many mushrooms that have very, shallow gills or few gills. I mean, normally when you look at a mushroom, it looks like almost like the pages of a book, because there's that much surface area that's created. But for me to achieve that on this, that would take a lot of time and maybe a little bit more skill than I even have at this moment. So the level of definition that I've really decided on is it's going to be roughly spacing like this of the gills all the way around. And I will take a chisel. Well, first off, I'm going to flatten out these ridges. And then I will take a chisel and mark each one of these individual gills from the edge to the center, while maintaining this circle in the center, which is where the stem is going to connect. So I'm going to get this laid out, and I'll do a bit of work, and I'll show you guys some shots in between. So after a near miss there, I've got this thing domed out. So it's opposite to the way that I'm going to be chiseling the pieces in, which is a little bit counterintuitive. But what that's going to do, it's going to provide a little bit more depth in between each one of these gills and give it a more 3D effect when I actually do chisel them in. So we'll see how that goes. And the other thing I want to do before I start chiseling those in, you can see that this center is quite a bit higher than this edge. And what I would like to achieve is to have this center on the same level as this before I start to chisel my pieces in. So an easy way to do that is to just lay this on a flat surface and grab a socket or something that's round that is the diameter that you wish to punch in. Lay it in. There we go. So now I have a mark established here. I'm going to smooth these little wrinkles back out, and then I'm going to start chiseling these pieces. And I'm going to show you a couple of little bits of the chiseling, but once I have this thing fully chiseled, we'll be back. Just going to use a chisel here that isn't too sharp, so I don't cut through the steel. And you'll notice I have these relief lines cut into my block, which is going to allow the metal to go past the center line. Give it a little bit more dimension. Careful near the edge not to cut through. That's one. So here we are with the final gills for the bottom of the mushroom. It may notice it kind of looks like a bunt pan or something along those lines, one of those cake pans. But what had happened is this center had sat roughly around here by the time I was completed with this, and then I just punched the center back down and did a little bit of forming and created a dish. So that's a pretty cool looking piece of steel in and of itself. That's pretty neat. But as mentioned before, one of the benefits of using materials that are like shaped, I didn't have to try to get this to the correct size to fit this when it was completed. So now, oops. That will fit in there. You see it's not set perfectly there, but you know, I'll get all that taken care of. But you can see where this is kind of going. It's starting to take a little bit of shape from a soup can into a mushroom. So the next portion we're going to be doing is the stem and the connection for that. So I'm going to get set up here. I'm going to pull out the middle portion of the can that I had stripped and taken care of, and that's going to be used to create the stem. So I'm going to get set up for that here. So these two components pretty much are done until we get to soldering them together and fitting them. So here's the side of the can all kind of laid out, and I've flattened out the corrugations that have been put in at the factory. You can still see the impressions, but that's okay because it's going to add texture that I don't have to do myself. So you can see the layout here. Sort of an hourglass shape, but I've got one end is a little bit fatter. However, I'm not going to be cutting contours. I will be cutting straight lines so that my solder joints are going to be even. So, with a little bit of work with some tin snips here, I was able to knock out that layout that you had seen earlier. Did a little bit of fine tuning. In fact, I knocked about an inch off of that height. So when I had kind of placed it together, it had looked a little bit too tall for me and for the board that I wish to establish. So with that extra inch gone, I think it's really going to make a big difference in the presentation. Anyhow, so we have this now, and from this we're going to be able to roll this together, kind of like this. And and then once we get that circle established, I can solder these joints together, and then we can work on fluting out either side to be able to achieve kind of like a bell shape that connects into the mushroom. So I'm going to get set up, and we're going to be using just a dolly or a piece of steel here to work against, just to most effectively get that thing rounded out. So I'm going to get that set up for the shots, and we'll see you in a second. So, as you seen earlier, I was able to bend this by hand quite easily, but the thing is that it wants to spring back, as you can see here. So, in effect, what I'm doing when I'm hammering this against this dolly is I'm setting a little micro wrinkle or a micro kink inside the steel that allows it to hold that shape. So that's essentially what's happening here when I'm cold forming, and this material's actually holding the shape when I'm hammering it. Otherwise, it just acts like a spring. So I've just moved on to a smaller piece of steel to work against, as the diameter of this is exceeding the diameter of the piece I wish to complete. And this is just a drift or a punch. I'm just going to work this out a little bit more all the way around. So with that bit of work done on this piece of steel here, we were able to get this thing nice and tight when it gets together. We push it together there, and it has a nice radius that we can work out once I do the final solder joint. But before I do any more work to this, these two fluted or flared portions here, I'd like to give them a bit more depth. So a bit more radiusing before I do my final solder joint, and that's just going to add a bit more dimension to the bottom of the stem. So I'm going to do that on this board in much the same manner as I did the cap. So I'll just power through that, and I'll show you guys some shots here, and in the next portion we're going to be getting all the pieces fit together, and then we're going to be doing some soldering, some cleaning work, and some posing and stuff. So, yeah. So there we have it, is one stem with a nice radius, and these flanged ends or fluted ends are kind of tucked in on themselves right now, just so that I can effectively solder this joint. I've got a couple of pieces of copper wire holding it all together right now, because it does want to spring open a little bit still, but once I get it soldered, that's going to take care of that. You see that joint is nice and tight. You can barely even see it actually, but it is there. That's great. So this thing ready to be soldered. These two need to be fit and soldered as well. All that's going to get done. I think what's going to happen now is that, so I'm going to try to do most of my soldering all at once, just so I don't have to set up, tear down, set up, tear down. And I want to do a few more mushrooms right now, so I think that's going to close out this video, or close to it right now. But the next mushroom I'd like to try would be, if you remember the tin can that I had shown as an example for wrinkling. If you've ever seen a morel, morels have a very wrinkled cap, and it's a unique shape and style. So to challenge myself, I think I would like to try to create a morel as well. Hey, that rhymed. Anyhow, but yeah, so we're going to cover that in the next video, as well as some of the design for the fae or the fairy creatures. But if you guys stuck it out this long, thank you very much. This is the first video in this series, so it really does help if you guys give it a like or comment or something along those lines. It helps with the exposure for the video. Anyhow, thank you very much, and take care, and we'll see you in episode 2.